Hey, it's Dr. Infantino. Welcome back to the Rebel Reset podcast. Today we're going to dive into yeast. It is an epidemic in this country. We're going to talk about that and the connection to things like bloating and fatigue, brain fog, weight gain, etc. You're going to learn a ton. I promise this is going to help you really understand the big picture. Probably heard about yeast. You probably heard the term candida. If you haven't, essentially what it means is you should have this much good bacteria in your gut that normally keep this much yeast or bad guys in check. Candida simply means I've lost some of the good guys, which allow now yeast, they're opportunistic, to start to multiply. Yeast is a problem when there's too many of them because they don't do the jobs of the good bacteria. So what I'm going to talk about first is what do the good bacteria do and what your gut is supposed to look like. Then I'm going to explain to you specifically what yeast causes, some of the symptoms, and ultimately how do you solve all this. So let's go back to the very beginning. The good bacteria, picture you should have about 100 trillion good guys. These guys should be about 300 to 500 strains, depending on who you talk to. But here's what's super important to understand. The way you get all this working properly in the first place is to be breastfed by someone who has a good gut. That's what lines the gut with good flora, right? And you have to go through the birth process because going through the birth canal actually migrates some of these guys from the mouth into the gut, and that's how you populate it. I've read some studies recently, somewhere between 10%, maybe 20% of Americans actually were breastfed for a year and went through the birth canal. So the problem for a lot of people, myself included, was not breastfed, didn't go through the birth canal, and what ends up happening is you have less good guys to begin with. Now, if you add to that things like Frosted Flakes and milk and Pop-Tarts and your typical American food, what happens? Well, very early on, I've got a deficit of good guys, and so yeast and bad guys start to grow. As soon as this happens, we've got a real problem because what are the jobs of the good guys? So let's start with that. The good bacteria in your gut have lots of jobs, right? One is they digest food. If you don't digest food well, as that food passes by the pancreas, your pancreas pumps out extra insulin. Insulin's a fat storage hormone. So this is where people are like, I've always had a challenge with my weight. I was overweight in high school. I mean, it was always a problem. My whole family, we were always on a diet. Just so happens I had tonsillitis, ear infections, on antibiotics. Again, kill good guys, bad guys grow. But the good guys have other jobs. And the reason I'm explaining this is if you're dealing with symptoms today, you'll be able to look at this and go, okay, look, 90% of health problems start with a gut that's off, right? So the good guys digest food. Less good guys, less food digestion, insulin higher, problems with weight. The good bacteria also make all our B vitamins. What are B vitamins used for? Exactly, energy. You know what the most common reason people go to doctors today? Fatigue, low energy. This is, by the way, if you have ever been to a weight loss clinic, what's the first thing they typically want to do? Exactly, pump you full of B12 shots. Why? Well, because they realize most people's guts are off. If we give them some B vitamins, they'll have a little more energy, they'll feel a little better, maybe they'll lose some weight. It's kind of why that happens. The good bacteria also lower systemic inflammation. If you're walking around, you're like, man, I'm kind of chronically inflamed, my joints are achy, I'm stiff, I'm kind of sore, like I don't know what's causing all this stuff. That is very likely due to less good flora in the gut. And I'll explain in a minute why when you have more yeast on top of that, it actually is like a double whammy, so to speak. That's the scientific term. So you have poor digestion, so you get gassy, bloaty, etc., and gain weight. Less B vitamins for energy. You have more systemic inflammation. The good bacteria, a lot of people don't realize, also lower or regulate blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol. Now here's one that I'm going to do an entire episode on in the future. 95% of your serotonin is made by gut flora. So wrap your head around that for a minute. For those of you who aren't familiar with serotonin, what is that? It is literally your natural zest for life, get up and go, antidepressant, brain fog, zest for life neurotransmitter. 95% of what helps you be up and about and enthusiastic and motivated, it's all made in your gut. Serotonin, by the way, is converted in your body into melatonin. That's what helps you fall asleep, stay asleep, wake up well rested. So people generally come to me, and what are the symptoms? Doc, I'm tired, I'm holding extra weight, I'm unmotivated, My blood pressure is creeping up now. My blood sugar is. Doctor wants to give me some meds, but they're saying, hey, let's keep an eye on it. We'll see what we can do. I don't want to go that route, so now I got supplements for all these things. And ultimately, what ends up happening? Well, they're just treating symptoms and managing them forever. So when we talk about the root cause, again, remember, if you lose the good guys, you lose their jobs, but then yeast grow. And this is an important thing to understand because yeast in the body, I would put this in like epidemic proportions, and I think most doctors out there wouldn't even acknowledge that it exists, right? What they think is like, well, yeast has to be so bad that you're, on blood work, you're in the hospital kind of a thing. But for a lot of people, yeast are sitting inside and they're silently creating all sorts of issues. Think of it this way. Again, if you lose the good guys, you lose the jobs they do. If you end up then, well, you will end up then with more yeast in the system. And what do? Well, yeast don't digest food or make B vitamins or run the immune system or anything like that. What they do is they ferment things. And what are products of fermentation? Well, products of fermentation are ethanol, acetaldehyde. In fact, I'll give you a good analogy. If you ever baked, right, you put a big blob of dough on the countertop, you take yeast, you put it in there, and what happens? The dough rises, right? It works the same exact way. And what I mean by this is if you're bloated, what's very likely happening is if you take usually the things that make people more bloated are what? Carby, grainy, gluten-y kind of things, maybe lactose found in dairy. If you take those things and you put them into yeast that you have in the gut, it's going to rise also. That's where people experience bloating, right? In fact, I would argue that's probably the main, if not the only thing that creates bloating in somebody. And that bloating, another good analogy, and I mentioned this last time, it's just like if you make beer. You get hops and barley and malt, right? You put it together with yeast and water. And when you get beer, you get bubbles. The bubbles are the bloating. Now, at the same time, you get ethanol, you get acetaldehyde. Those are byproducts of yeast fermentation in the gut. So people always ask me, well, how do I know if I have it? And why isn't my candida diet working? Well, if you should have this many good guys and this many yeast, and over time you lose the good guys from one round of antibiotics, kills 80% of them. Things like chemicals in food, birth control, anti-inflammatories, Tylenol, Advil, coffee, it all adds up. So if you lose good guys like most Americans have, and you have more yeast than bad guys, now unfortunately, anytime you eat something sugary, dairy tends to be one of the big things like a yeast superfood, so is gluten, which is why most people are sensitive to these things. As soon as you feed them, they multiply. The byproduct are gas, right? So that's why the dough rises. That's why beer has bubbles. In fact, when you pour a glass of beer, what happens? Bubbles rise. As the bubbles rise, it pushes acid from the stomach up into the esophagus. One of the main reasons people deal with reflux, right? And again, go to well-meaning doctors who you say, hey, you need some antacid, you have too much acid. Nobody ever has too much acid. You end up with acid in the wrong place, that's when it's a problem. So I'm not saying no one should do antacids, but what I am saying, ultimately, get to the root of the problem. Get rid of the yeast and grow back the good bacteria. They'll keep the bad guys in check. You kind of live happily ever after. So one of the things that is kind of misunderstood with this, people think, you know what, that whole yeast thing, that makes sense. I think I probably got that. So what do? Well, there is no shortage of candida kits out there, yeast killing supplements. What's the problem with them? Look, you could take drugs that kill yeast, itraconazole, fluconazole, etc. You could wipe the yeast down to almost nothing. But if there's not enough good guys to keep the bad guys in check, yeast grow back. And that's where we start getting these symptoms of I'm bloated, especially if I eat any kind of carbs. I'm tired because byproducts of yeast, just like if you make beer or alcohol, acetaldehyde, goes around the body, makes us feel just kind of, if you're walking around and you feel achy, tired, stiff, sore, especially if you have carby type foods, you almost certainly have yeast in your system, particularly if they make you bloated. Now, you could still have a yeast issue and not have like instant bloating. Those are people, they're just kind of chronically bloated. Like, I don't know if any food seems to make me worse. It's just all is bad. Usually the way this works, by the way, is if you wake up in the morning and you're like, hey, my belly's kind of flat, and throughout the day, it gets bigger and bigger. It's literally like that loaf of bread. It's just rising in you. When you put food in, yeast ferment it, it rises, you feel bloated, usually end up tired, etc. And the alcohol, the acetaldehyde, the bad products that yeast produce when they ferment makes inflammation. And it makes just, again, achy, stiff, brain foggy type of stuff. So hopefully that's helpful. Now, ultimately, how do you solve this stuff? And that's really super important. Where people really get frustrated, I think, is they're taking a whole bunch of probiotics and prebiotics and digestive enzymes and L-glutamine, etc. But really what it boils down to, scrub the gut wall clean, grow back the villi, which is the home for the good bacteria, repopulate the good guys, they keep the bad guys in check, and then you don't have to try to manage this endlessly. And I can't tell you how often people come into me and they're like, here's my bag of supplements. I understand all this. That's why I don't eat any carbs and sugar. I'm like, who wants to go through life on this journey and manage this forever? What you want to do is scrub it all clean and fix it. So that's really the key to the whole thing. Unfortunately, the internet is kind of rampant with, gut experts. It seems like you can't get on without hitting up somebody's information that says, you just need a better probiotic, or you just need to take this formula to kill yeast, or you just need, don't ever eat sugar again, or do a keto diet only. And I'm not saying there isn't some benefit to giving up sugar. In fact, let's say, you got to fit into, a dress or a pair of pants or something. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm so bloated. The fastest way to get the bloat down is to not feed yeast. It's not a permanent solution though. So if, let's say, Saturday night, you got to wear something, you're like, I need this bloating down. I would say Friday morning, just stick to just lean proteins and pretty much like healthy fats, right? You could get some veggies in like salads, etc. But you want to avoid things like fruit, which I'm not saying is bad for you. It's just not good for you if you've got yeast in your system, right? So anything that feeds yeast will create bloating, and that is generally things like potatoes and corn and fruit and bread and pasta. So dairy, carby veggies, fruit, if you avoid those for a period of time, you will notice that actually the bloating will come down. I'm not a big advocate of doing that forever, because as you can imagine, like, fruit's not bad for you. You just want to solve the problem. But if you really find yourself in a pinch and you're like, I've got to get this bloating down, avoid carbs for, I'd say, 24, 48 hours, probably ideal. You will notice that, yeah, the bloating absolutely comes down. A lot of patients come in to me, by the way, and they say, oh my gosh, I feel so much better when I do a carnivore kind of diet or a keto diet. Again, I'm not a big advocate for those things. I think carbs are fine, but if in the short term, you want to make sure that you're less bloated, those type of diets will feed yeast less. The problem is they're just not sustainable. So that's why I've become a big advocate over the years of, look, solve the actual problem. It's not about starving yeast or candida diets long term. It's not about taking drugs or even supplements to kill them. It is ultimately about restoring gut flora so the good guys can keep the bad guys in check. That's the key. The reason, by the way, all the probiotics and prebiotics and all the stuff the gurus on the internet talk about don't work is the good guys need a home. Most people's gut lining that should be lined with all these healthy fibers called villi, which again, kind of looks like a paintbrush if you're looking down at the tip of it. That's how thick they should be. There should be millions of these, each with millions of good bacteria. And their jobs, of course, are, digest food, make B vitamins. I talk a lot about that stuff. But ultimately, the good guys keep the bad guys in check. And that's the long-term solution. And that's really what we work on at the office, right? When I meet with someone, and the reason I meet with them really is to ask enough of the right questions to figure out, is the gut out of balance? Do they have something going on that I can help them with? If that's the case, then you have to design a plan. And that plan revolves really around three things. Number one, the right food, relatively short term. It means don't feed the bad guys, don't kill the good guys, and don't upset your liver. Number two, there are specific combinations of herbals that go in and scrub out the muck that most people have accumulated in the gut so that you can again restore the villi, which then are the home for the good guys, and you can repopulate them. And ultimately, and this is really important, it is about journaling and keeping track of what you're doing so that you can tweak it as you go, right? In other words, there's no cookie cutter way to do this stuff. Everybody's different. So if someone's writing down what they're eating and then keeping track of symptoms like, do you feel bloated? Did you have, how many bowel movements did you have? Do you feel, tired? How did you sleep? What's your energy like? What's your inflammation like? Those are all signs that are real-time data for what's going on as we go along. Based on that information, then myself or my team will say, hey, take less of this herbal, take more of this one, here's why. You have to go in and tweak it to the person as they go. And the beauty of having someone journal as they go through a protocol to solve this really is, well, twofold. One, you get a great result as fast as possible. And two, I always tell my patients, objective is to get a PhD in you, right? You have to become empowered. You can't just go to your doctor and say, hey, I'm tired, I'm achy, I'm stiff, I'm sore. You're gonna get, well, have some caffeine, here's an anti-inflammatory, oh, your blood pressure's going up, oh, here's blood pressure meds. And that's just a real slippery slope. So I'm just a huge fan of get to the root cause of the problem, empower yourself, learn how to keep it that way. That's really the key to the whole thing, right? Like my parents, for instance, they're in their 80s. They've been kind of doing this stuff forever. They're on really no meds. They go to doctors maybe once every 6 months or once a year for a checkup. They're not really on any diets. And it's not because they have great genetics. I mean, we struggled, all of us, for a long time. But it was getting this stuff dialed in and knowing how to keep it dialed in, which is ultimately the key to the whole thing. Hey, thanks for listening to the Rebel Reset podcast. If anything there made sense or resonated with you, don't stop there. Take the next step. So head over to join.drinfantino.com. In there, there's a video where I explain all of this in more detail. There's actually also an opportunity to book a consultation so we can dive into what's going on with you, see if this is actually something I can help you with. And remember, just because you have these symptoms, that doesn't mean it always has to be that way. It's not your destiny. You don't have to be on this journey forever. There's absolutely an answer to the problem. I will see you in the next episode and we'll dive into it more.